Typically, I begin these videos off with, I just finished watching Invincible Season 1, and today I'm going to be talking about it, but I finished Season 2 just now, and I just never got around to making a video on Invincible Season 1, which I'm incredibly disappointed in myself for, because I would love, and I really, really love this show so far, and I want to dive into about as deep as I can possibly get to it, so we're still going to do that. I'm going to review Invincible Season 1, I'm going to talk about the plot points, what I liked, what I didn't like, my thoughts on it as I was watching it, but unfortunately, it's not as fresh in my brain as the things that I usually upload about, but hey, we're going to do our best today. We're going to talk about Invincible Season 1 in just a second. Before we do though, I do want to say hello everybody and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I am your guy with too many YouTube channels. Let's talk about Invincible. So, I'm just going to dive right into it. We open up Invincible with your typical superhero fight scene, and it's just kind of introducing you to the Guardians of the Globes, and most importantly, this character named Omni-Man. And it's interesting because at the time of recording this video, I just finished Season 2. I really, really like the way that they have approached the story of Omni-Man, because I thought he was just going to be the Superman. I didn't expect him to be a bad guy, but the problem is, I knew that him and Mark throughout the very beginning, because we're going to get into Mark throughout the season, unfortunately, I knew that they're going to have this big, horrible fight, because that meme that went viral when Invincible first came out, and it's just Omni-Man beating the crap out of Mark on a rock. And I was like, okay, well, what's going to happen here? But I didn't actually think that Omni-Man was going to be a bad guy. So he's presented as this big Superman guy. He's super cool. Is it J.K. Simmons? Is that his name? You can tell that he's the dude from Spider-Man. I think he's great for the character. So we're introduced to everybody. Very, very quick introduction. Now, the entire point of the episode is kind of talking about Mark and the family, and they're waiting for Mark's powers to merge, which it does. But before that, we have a little bit of a scene with Mark dealing with a bully. He's kind of a good guy. Doesn't fight back. Amber ends up saving the day. Little bit weird, but that's a-okay. Mark ended up liking it. Amber just, for some reason, developed a little bit of an interest in him from that. But throughout the episode, we do learn that Mark, all of a sudden, we're getting like right into the story. Mark developed his powers, and this is kind of where the entire series begins. Throughout the rest of the episode, though, there's actually not too much to break down, because it's more so about Mark learning to use his powers, wanting to be like his father, wanting to be like Omni-Man. And again, the entire point is Omni-Man is kind of introduced as this Superman type figure. Like I said, he is this big hero. He's a big savior, right? And Mark really, really looks up to Omni-Man, wants to be like him. So Nolan ends up teaching Mark about using the powers, how strong he is, and it's just like your typical introductory episode. And honestly, it encapsulated me more than most pilot episodes. I usually hate getting into new shows, as weird as that is, but after Mark ends up learning to use his powers, he ends up stopping a robber or something like that. He ends up getting a suit, and he wants to be named Invincible. But here's where the really weird thing happens, and where Invincible kind of did a really good job in keeping me watching throughout the first episode, because at the end of the episode, the Guardians of the Globe are all hanging out, and they're attacked by Omni-Man, who we just spent the last hour kind of viewing as, like I keep describing, like Superman. He's the best hero of them all. He saves the day. Even at the beginning of the episode, the heroes were having issues, and Omni-Man came in, saved the day, no problem. Everybody loves Omni-Man, right? He came in and actually just straight up murdered everybody. Well, just about everybody. He straight up murdered them, and it was so gory. It was so horrible, and Omni-Man looked so... I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like they were disgusting. You know, he got off on killing them, which was really strange. So I was like, okay, wow. And I love the way that they built the season, because it's not just your typical superhero thing. It's also a murder mystery. I like it, man. I like it, and I can't wait. Like, I'm on the edge of my seat in Season 2 right now, because is Nolan going to be a good guy? I'm not going to talk about it, but where I left off was, I think I missed my wife. I'm like, huh? Well, it's crazy. That's crazy to me, dude. I love it, but it's a really, really good introductory episode. And one other thing I forgot to mention about that is Omni-Man, of course, didn't just go and murder everybody and, like, go free. He ended up framing it as, like, oh my god, I was attacked, and I don't remember anything, because I don't remember if he was damaged in the fight or if he ended up hurting himself, but at the end of the episode, he just kind of laid down. And this is where we are introduced to the GDA and Cecil. And I actually really like Cecil as a character. I was really back and forth with him throughout the entire time, but now you can see that he, like, legitimately really cares for Debbie. He really cares for Mark and everybody. He can just be a kind of, like, I don't know, I don't want to say by the book guy, but he likes to be in charge, right? So what happens is we're introduced to Cecil. He informs Mark and his mother, Debbie, and just what's going on with the Guardians, and Nolan's okay, but in the meantime, we're introduced to these new aliens. It's Mark's kind of first mission by himself, and I really like what they've done with the kind of antagonist of the story. I don't even know, like, who the real antagonist is, but whenever they have, like, an issue, it's a kaiju, it's aliens from Mars, it's all of these really interesting villains, because what happens is these aliens come in, they are so powerful, they're attacking everybody, but here on Earth, it's not the same reality, so they age super fast. So they end up retreating. Mark ends up kind of saving the day, but getting a taste of his own superhero battles, and this is where you see Mark kind of like have a little bit of dialogue with himself, because the superhero job wasn't exactly what he expected. He wanted to just be like Omni-Man, save the day, right? So Mark is going through some incredible character development, but after that, because now Mark has been introduced to the entire Guardians of the Globe, he goes back to school and he recognizes Adam Eve, or just Eve, we like to call it, and then they end up sharing their secret identities with each other, and they become kind of friends at school. I thought that they were going to end up together, but who knows if that's going to happen. Ends up being with Amber, but that's A-okay. And with these aliens, Nolan ends up and kind of comes and saves the day, still more powerful than everybody, but after that, we're then introduced to Alan, which I actually really like as a character. It's oddly enough that I can unhear the Seth Rogen from him. He's just a really cool character. So he comes in and Cecil's like, hey, Mark, we need to get you up there. Something's coming to Earth, right? And so Mark ends up going up there. They kind of have a battle for just a second. Alan's like communicating telepathically with him, which is, again, a really cool power. I love the way that they handled powers this time around. It's not just Invisible Girl, oh, Superman, you know? It's really interesting and unique powers. Mark is really the only Superman type figure, because now you have this alien who can just communicate with one person through telepathy, and I think that's really cool. So they're talking, Mark's like, what are you doing? You can hear my thoughts, and it just made for this really funny moment, but it was really important to introduce Alan to us as a character where it's like, oh, you're not this planet? Oh, Earth. Well, see you later. They're friends now. And then Alan ended up becoming such a important character moving forward in the series, but after that, of course, we are introduced to Darkblood, who is a demon who is apparently never wrong about a crime, and he suspects that whoever killed the Guardians was among them. And he obviously suspects Nolan, because Nolan was the only one left alive throughout it, which honestly would make sense. I don't know why they didn't figure that out a little bit more, because they were also talking about like, wow, somebody knocked out Omni-Man. That's really something there. After that, we have a really quick funeral for all the Guardians. Darkblood ends up accusing Nolan in person about his suspicions, and Nolan kind of threatens to kill him, but Darkblood kind of gets the upper hand in the situation. Nolan kind of shrugs it off like, well, I'm not the murderer, you know? But in the meantime, Cecil ended up building the brand new Guardians of the Globe, and it consists of all of our brand new heroes. They're all really cool, and again, I loved what they did with the superpowers here. You have a girl who ages, I think it's a week, or she de-ages a week, gets a week younger every single time she uses her powers. You have Duplicate, you have Adam Eve, who can kind of build matter from nothing. Just, the superpowers were really cool in here. And you have Robot, who can, of course, kind of do anything. And I love even what they did with Robot over here. So, we're introduced to all these new characters. Everybody is kind of, some people are friends, some people are bickering, some people are a-holes, some people are not. And we then are cut to Eve and Rex, who are now together, and Mark did look a little bit disappointed, but I wasn't too sure if that was the goal of that situation. But Eve ended up finding out that Duplicate, who can make, I guess, infinite copies of herself, ended up cheating on Rex with her, and Eve ran into that, so she ended up quitting the Guardians of the Globe. And Rex was like, what? What's going on? What? Like, what a piece of crap, man, honestly. In the meantime, though, we continue with the romance, because Mark actually gets the balls to ask Amber on a study date, or kind of awkwardly end up asking her on a study date, and for some reason Amber is interested in Mark back, maybe because he's good looking, tall, I don't really know, but from the way Mark presented himself in high school, he didn't really seem like a super appealing guy. But then again, if you look at Amber, she's not necessarily a super appealing girl, so maybe those two coming together kind of makes sense. Amber is not your typical, I don't know, like the girl that most people would want to be with, and Mark isn't, he's just a little bit of an awkward guy. I guess that makes sense. I'm going on about that too much, to be honest with you. I don't know. I wouldn't like to date Amber. I don't know about you guys. I don't know, she's a little too much, but regardless, they end up going on a study date, but this is the beginning of their many interruptions, because Mark, who doesn't want to tell her that he's invincible, has to lie and have all of this family help, and Amber just waits for him to get back, right? While Mark's gone, Eve is heartbroken and ends up seeking out Mark, and who we later find out who actually ended up loving Mark, but she finds Mark back with Amber, and there's nothing she can do about it. She's just a little bit sad, but because Eve is a good person, Eve ends up accepting Mark's happiness and is sad about herself and her own situation, but is legitimately happy for Mark, because again, Eve is a good person. We love Eve. W Eve. Now, we end up ending this episode with Darkblood giving Debbie a visit and actually convincing Debbie to have suspicions about Nolan. And this is what, throughout the first season of Invincible, I found the most interesting, because I was wondering if Debbie was going to find out and or suspect that Nolan was actually the killer, because she loved and admired and respected her husband, her superhero, for so long. And now Darkblood is really putting all of these thoughts into her head, which honestly made a little bit of sense. And I was having trouble figuring out whether or not Debbie was kind of buying it a little bit, until she actually ended up searching it up for herself, because I don't remember if it was in the same scene, but she ended up looking up different cases that were solved by Darkblood, where it's like, this guy's never wrong, he does it again, what's going on, everybody doubted this guy, and she gets suspicious of herself. In the meantime, though, that we're then brought into the fun Mars episode, and I want to say this might be one of my favorite episodes throughout the entire thing. So Cecil ends up talking to Mark and Nolan, and he's like, hey, I need somebody to go to Mars. I need somebody to accompany these astronauts. They're going to go land on Mars. They have a mission over there. Nolan says, absolutely not. I'm here on Earth. And Mark goes, hey, I want to help people. I want to go there. After a little bit of back and forth, he ends up doing it. And Nolan and Cecil, is something that I didn't mention, really don't like each other. I don't really know why. Maybe it's because Nolan had his ulterior motives. I don't know. I never really knew what to think about them two, like, actually disliking each other. But regardless, Mark ended up going up, and after being bored, after just looking at his phone because he doesn't have a connection to Amber, he ends up falling asleep. And hey, the astronauts are gone, but the astronauts ended up being abducted by Martians because they were going to get taken over by these, they didn't call them squids, I don't remember what they're called, but these little brain sucker things. If they were to get to a human, they could take over the entire planet of Mars, which they were really worried about, and that's why they wanted to execute the astronauts. Mark, of course, doesn't let that happen. He escapes with them, but long story short, one of the humans was already taken over by that, and the astronaut ended up taking over the planet of Mars. So we know that these horrible squid things are going to eventually come down to Earth, and Mark is bringing one of them to Earth, one of the Martians. In the meantime, though, back on Earth, Cecil is convinced that Nolan was the killer, but he didn't want to say anything. He didn't want to confront Nolan until he could figure out why Nolan would have went and killed all the Guardians. And this is where, again, I was kind of on the edge of my seat the entire time, because I wanted to know why Nolan did that. It didn't really make sense. He's there, he's saving humanity, he's saving the planet, and he goes and just kills the other heroes. Is he that egotistical? But there had to have been more to that, right? So that's what, I was most interested in with the entire thing. But regardless, Cecil's suspicious. Nolan doesn't really know, but Nolan in the meantime does regain Debbie's trust by bringing her to Rome and kind of like telling her a little white lies, or like, stuff like, hey, we've always been here for each other. I love you with all my heart, things like that. And in the meantime, Robot also ended up getting Rex's DNA, which was very strange, and it just gets a little bit weirder. Continuing on, though, we're brought back over to Debbie, who ends up finding Darkblood's notepad, who he ended up leaving because ends up being the greatest detective ever for some reason. I don't really know why, a demon, but regardless, Darkblood's notepad is left there, and Debbie's suspicions are completely reignited, and she ends up finding Nolan's bloodied suit while he's away. She sends him on a shopping list across the world and has 20 minutes, and she ends up finding the suit. I don't know why Nolan would hide the suit in a spot that he did. If he's super, why didn't he just like bury it? I'm sure that he could do that in 5 seconds, right? But hey, regardless, doesn't really matter. We're then brought over to Robot, who ends up offering the 2 blue monster clones a secret job, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because we end up finding out that he just wants to be a real boy. And while that's happening, Mark ends up promising Amber to work at a soup kitchen, and ends up promising to help fight a guy named Machine Head. They end up having their big battle. Mark ends up being completely beaten up. Eve has to cover from Mark to Amber because he is just a really great guy. Now we're brought back into the college episode, and we're really introduced. I don't remember if we actually saw him before, but William, Mark's friend, they end up going up to college with Amber, and they want to have this nice weekend together. Everything's a-okay, but this new, oh crap, what's his name? Oh my god, I'm having a huge, but Rick, sorry. Rick ended up getting captured by this weird scientist guy who wanted to test people and take people apart, and he ends up being tortured because before that, actually, where they have a little bit of an encounter with one of the people that he was testing on. Mark ends up saving the day, but Amber thinks he ran away and saved himself, which causes her to break up with him. Understandably so, because any good boyfriend would do anything to step in front of his girl, right? And it just appears that Mark just dipped, like, hey, problem. See ya, Amber, you know, that's... So I understand Amber's anger throughout that, but Invincible ended up saving a day. But William noticed that it actually was Invincible, but he didn't say anything. I don't understand why it's such a big deal to have the secret identity. I don't get it, man. It would have been easier to just know the truth, as Debbie says later on, right? It's always better to know the truth. I like to think that personally. I know there's situations where that's not the case, but it would explain why you're disappearing so often, right? And if you're in a relationship with somebody, she deserves to know. Instead of, oh, I have family issues. Oh my god, I was late again, just damaging the relationship. But anyways, that same scientist ends up capturing Rick, turns him into this weird cyborg, and they end up having to fight each other, into which he ends up killing himself. This show's so gory, man. It's crazy, and I really enjoyed it. And William, who had a huge crush on Rick, this dude just launched himself onto a spear. No, wait. Or was that the other guy? Apologies if there's an incorrect thing about this, because they end up saving him after that. I'm very sorry, a little bit fuzzy. This is the problem when I wait to make these videos. I'm very, very sorry if that's incorrect. I feel like it is. But now we're moving on kind of to the climax of the season, because Debbie ends up bringing Mark's suit down to the suit guy. He ends up figuring out that the oldest blood was on Nolan's fist, so he ended up striking first, and it's basically confirmed that Nolan did end up killing the Guardians. They end up agreeing to stay silent, and this is where the tension was, right? Because Nolan was starting to get angry. Nolan was starting to lose it because he could tell his wife was suspicious. He could tell his wife wasn't trusting him. She ends up drinking too much. She ends up getting a little bit depressed, angry. Obviously, she knows something. Obviously, she doesn't trust Nolan anymore. And this is where the show really, really captured me in, because that was the story that I was most interested in personally. Couple more things to note before we continue on is that Robot ended up creating a clone of himself. We don't know exactly why yet, but I'll just talk about it now, because he wanted to be a real boy with real feelings, and he ended up wanting to have a connection with Monster Girl as a little kid. He ended up being a little bit of a Rex, and other than that, Eve ends up deciding to skip college, and she just wants to help people. That's pretty much the end of the episode. Other than that, they end up resurrecting Immortal, which is another Omni-Man type person, but Immortal is deeply, deeply broken. Now, the biggest part of the season, and this is where I was waiting for it, because I ended up figuring out the meme in a little bit, where it's like, okay, Nolan must end up being the bad guy, because I end up having this really, really gory, horrible fight with Mark's teeth getting beaten out. Father and son just don't do that, right? It's unfortunate that I saw that meme, but but I'm like, okay, they end up figuring it out. And I don't remember when I found that out, but it was a little bit before this. So regardless, Cecil and Nolan end up having a brief chat. And Nolan, I don't remember where he tries to go. I think he tries to reach Mark. He ends up going crazy, and Cecil ends up deploying a kaiju onto him, but Mark and Eve end up reaching them first, and they end up taking on the kaiju together. In the meantime, something I forgot to mention too is Invincible ends up telling Amber who he actually is, and she's like, I already knew, which is weird. I don't know really why. They have a brief fight with the kaiju. Immortal comes in and is really, really pissed off at Nolan. He's like, Omni-Man! And just they have this horrible fight. Nolan ends up beating the crap out of him. And after a really, really long, kind of heartbreaking, really tense fight, Nolan asks to speak with Mark. Mark accepts the brief conversation, but is a little bit weary of Nolan, and Nolan actually ends up telling the entire truth, where he is an infiltrator to Earth sent from the Viltrum Empire, and he wants to conquer Earth, which was super confusing to listen to at first, because Nolan was end up just saving the world, but ultimately Nolan ended up failing convincing Mark to join him, because he's like, Mark, you're part of this Viltrum Empire. You're here with me. Join me. You're better than all of these pathetic people, and he's being really, really demeaning, and at some point he ends up describing, this is where he sent it off into the no territory for Mark, is because Mark ended up saying, but you love me. You love your family. You love being here. I know you, Dad. And he goes, I looked at your mother kind of like a pet, and Debbie was listening. Oh. They end up having this heartbreaking fight. The meme is officially born. I'm witnessing it in real time, but I'm actually at this point, because I was so invested in it, I actually forgot about the meme a little bit. It was just this horrible father-son battle, and what Nolan ended up making Mark do was kill so many people in Chicago, making him bust through a train, using Mark as a shield to like kind of tear apart people, devastating Mark. Ends up fighting him, and Nolan's not supposed to have any feelings towards people, right? But he's beating up Mark in the meme scene that we saw. Teeth shattered out, beating him to the brink of death. And Mark says something to the point where it's like, because Nolan starts talking about like, oh, you will outlive every pathetic being on this planet. Who will you have? And Mark ends up going, I'll still have you, Dad. I love you, or something like that. and Nolan ends up actually feeling love for his son, which we later find out is the case because it was a little bit obvious, but it wasn't necessarily confirmed. He ended up crying a little bit, and he's like, why would you make me do this? And then he just shoots up into space and takes off. After that big fight, we kind of put a close to the entire season. The world learns of Noel's betrayal. Omni-Man is officially the bad guy, and I love the way they turned this hero at the beginning of the season to this ultimate villain that we have over here. Debbie's devastated, but Mark and Debbie are ended up being like saved socially because there was a gas leak or something and the house ended up blowing up. But other than that, Mark and Amber end up being okay. They broke up temporarily, but they end up actually loving each other. Everybody learns of Eve's secret identity, not that it was difficult to figure her out because she didn't wear a mask. Don't understand that one, but other than that, Alan ends up coming back, and Alan ends up shedding a little bit more light on the Viltrumites, where it's like, okay, they don't just abandon their post. Something weird is going on. Maybe he's coming back. We don't really know, but there's more to this story. And Alan just comes in, drops that information, and we don't see Alan again for a little while. But other than that, Mark decides he wants to go to school. He wants to finish school, and we're brought into season 2. So the first season was phenomenal. I wish that I could have stopped on different points over here, but I had a couple points in front of me that I wanted to go through because, again, I'm already finished season 2 now, which I will make a video on. I'll be able to dive a little bit more deep into that. I always feel bad when I make these kinds of videos. I hope it was still enjoyable. Like, I wish I could have stopped more, that's all, because I was really excited. I loved this series, and I thought I did an okay job. It's just I could have done better. I could have done better. That's all, guys. Thank you very, very much for watching the video. Let me know what you thought about Invincible Season 1 down below. Don't spoil the rest for me, please. Thank you very much. If you guys are interested, check out this review I just did from Inside Out. One of the best movies of the year. Check it out right there, guys. I will see you over there. Take care.